Welcome back to Nightly Nonsense, where we try to make some sense out of the nonsense all around us. And I don't know about you, but in our world today, that's a big deal. And there are a lot of things to be concerned about. There are a lot of things that have us turning our attention to ourselves more and more and more. I was talking to a pastor friend the other day, and we were talking about the fact that the Bible talks about in the last days a great deception, right? That if possible, even is going to take the elect away, right? And we were talking about the fact that some of that deception is going to be based on pure selfishness. This idea that God takes care of those who take care of themselves, so let me take care of myself. And that is purely not true, and it's a deception, right? And so we look at all of the different stories in the Bible, and do you know that all of the main characters, I can't think of an exception. All of the main characters are faced with a moment where they could choose to take all that God has given them and just really, really think about themselves, right? Adam and Eve had that moment, and they failed, right? Cain had that moment, and he failed. Right? Moses had that moment where God said to him, hey, I'll wipe all of these people off the face of the earth and just start with you. And Moses said, no. Imagine how that looks, right? All of the main characters, Joseph, David, all of them had moments where they were given an opportunity to think about themselves, use their resources, their gifts, their talents, and think about themselves. For a lot of them, it went poorly, like Saul, King Saul, right? A lot of them, they made the right choice. It's one of the things I love about the story of Ezekiel. We're in Ezekiel chapter 34 specifically. God's talking about shepherding. He's talking to you and I. You've heard me talking about this. It's funny because last night at our Bible study, we were talking about, hey, listen, what happens if the world goes crazy and our church gets shut down? Like physically it gets shut down. What are we going to do? Now, I'm not going to go into details because you can listen to Summer and I do this in seeds, right? And I don't want to take away from that. But what happens if we can no longer go to church, but we have to actually start being the church, right? Then you know what happens? You become a pastor. You become a shepherd. Wherever you are, whoever puts under you. So if you're the male and you're the head of the household, you're shepherding the whole household. If you're the woman and you have kids, well, guess what? You're shepherding your kids, right? And you're helping your husband when he needs it, right? And all of these things. You guys are shepherding your neighbors, right? How am I going to reach out to my neighbors? All of these kind of things. And God has some things in Ezekiel 34 to say about shepherding, right? It's what we need to think about in our crazy world today. The world says, think about yourself. God says, think about others. Not when it's convenient to think about others. Not when you want to think about others. Not when you like the others that you're thinking about. No, you need to think about all of the others, right? And so he has some things that he says about shepherds. So we read verses 1 through 3. Let me read them again. It says this, the word of the Lord came to me, son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Do you know that God's saying right there, prophesy this against the people who are supposed to be representing me. That ought to stop you in your tracks, and that ought to have you shaking just a little bit. Because what if God did that to you and I? What if God said, hey, Annie, I got these things against you. Now we know that this is something God does because he's not just doing it here. He does it throughout the Old Testament, but he does it in the book of Revelation to the whole church. He sits down and says, I love this about you, but this I have against you. Do you know when God says he has something against you, do you know what it normally is all about? It's all about you and I being disobedient, right? God says, I have this about you. You're not following me with your whole heart. You're only following me with part of your heart if you're doing that. So it goes on and he says, prophesy, say to them, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord God, shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. So you take full advantage of the sheep. Every part of it you get to benefit from. but you're not taking care of the sheep. Do you know when this philosophy plays out? Plays out when you get in business and you're big enough, or in church and you're big enough, where it starts to not matter if people come and go, right? If you're in a business and you lose a customer, but you have 8 million more, nobody cares. But you know how that business started off? Every customer mattered. You made every customer important so that you could grow. That's how you grow businesses. But then all of a sudden, we get to this place where, like, at any given time, 20% of the people aren't coming to church. And we're just rotating people, right? All of a sudden, it doesn't matter. God says, it does matter. It matters to me. Verse 4, the weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, and the strayed you have not brought back. The lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. I want you to hold that right there for a second. And I want you to go back with me, forward with me actually, to Luke chapter 4. Let me read a familiar thing that you guys have all heard me say before, right? In Luke chapter 4, Jesus says this, starting in verse 18. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's quoting Isaiah, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, proclaim liberty to the captives, sight to the blind, and set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's the mission of Jesus. Do you know, it's funny, God never changes. Do you know God's heart is exactly the same? His heart is exactly the same. He wants to take care of those who are oppressed, those who need strengthened, those who are sick, those who are not healed, those who are injured, he wants those people to be taken care of, which, by the way, if you and I were smart, that includes us. But the problem is most of us walk around pretending that we're a perfectly healthy sheep when we're not. Do you know that when you have sheep, because I've had them before, and you only shear them once a year, do you know that they turn into these humongous, gigunda wool machines, right? They have so much wool, it's crazy, right? The sun can't get through the wool. The rain can't get through the wool. Nothing can get through the wool. They are perfectly, wonderfully insulated, right? It is fantastic. But do you know that when you take off the wool, you actually see what your sheep looks like? I was absolutely dumbfounded the first time one of my sheep were sheared, because I thought my sheep were really fat sheep. And then they took all the wool off and I went, holy cow, what is that? Now, my sheep came with wool, right? So I never saw them shorn before. And so I looked at them and I went, I don't think I'm feeding my sheep. I don't think I'm taking good care of them. They're these skinny little tiny things, right? And you're like, now that is not how it occurs, right? When they have wool on, I can fit 3 of them in a pen. When they take their wool off, I can fit 10 of them in a pen, right? So we look and we say, it's not until you take the wool off that you really know what's going on, right? That's the same way. Like, we have to know our sheep. We have to know our sheep, even though they're pretending like they're these great wool machines. Are they healthy? Are they sick? Right? Are they broken? Right? Do you know that sheep can be covered with lice, and they can be covered with mites, and they can be ticks and all these things, and you not have a clue. You don't have a clue, right? Unless you know your sheep. If you know your sheep and you know what to look for, and they're not eating and they're not doing that, then you're worried. But you could look at a big, fat, plump sheep and go, oh, they're perfectly healthy. But they're not healthy, right? You got to know your sheep. Do you know the people around you? The people who are closest to me, when there's something wrong, I know it. Sometimes it's just a little check, you're like, there's something wrong. Sometimes it's plainly obvious, right? They're putting all the signs on of there's something wrong, right? Sometimes, though, there are people, we just don't know them well enough, and we assume that everything's together. They got it all together, right? Sitting with some people last night, and I was asking this person, right, like, hey, who are you praying for, right? Get out of your bubble of just praying for yourself. Who are you praying for? And imagine my surprise when this person said, well, if you really want to know, if you want me to be honest, I'm praying for you guys. Do you know how humbling that is, right? Because I'm a people pleaser, so the very first thing that goes in my mind is, what am I doing wrong? Why are they praying for me, right? Why do I need to pray protection? Do you know what I find? Almost every time somebody's telling me that they're praying for protection. Within 24 hours, something happens that I needed the protection about. Same thing last night. Person tells me they're praying protection. This morning, immediately came to my mind, yep, this is why they're praying protection, because the enemy is attacking all the time. We have to know our people. We got to know our sheep, right? But we also have to know the great shepherd. Again, I said it before. Let me say it again. You are not the great shepherd. I know that's very surprising. You might be a great shepherd, but you're not the great shepherd. Do you know? I goof that up all the time, right? Again, those that are closest to me, I want to sometimes cross the line and be the great shepherd for them. I want to do everything for them. I want to keep them safe. I want to do all the things as if they're mine, right? That's not wrong to want all of that. What's wrong, though, is when you cross the line and you realize, I didn't create them, I didn't make them, they're not mine, I don't own them. I just get to act, think, and believe that they're mine. But always I defer to the great shepherd. Here's what there's being accused of right here. You're not deferring to the great shepherd. You're wanting to be the great shepherd. Now listen, we can do that with other people, but we can also do it with ourselves. We can also not defer to the great shepherd about ourselves, right? I think it's fantastic that I know my weaknesses. I think it's fantastic that I share with other people my weaknesses, and they know my weaknesses. But what happens, as I was reminded this morning in our prayer time, what happens when you're spending all your time troubleshooting your weaknesses? You're not deferring to the great shepherd, you're trying to be the great shepherd, right? And the great shepherd says, search for me, seek me, listen to my voice, come when I call, all of these things, right? You don't have to come when the great shepherd calls you if you're eating where you're not supposed to be eating. The great shepherd is calling you to his banquet table, to his food, but you're over here eating of another table. And so you're going to miss the call. That's what's been happening here. The shepherds decided they wanted to be the great shepherd, not great shepherds. Hey, I'm going to leave it right there. One verse in Ezekiel 34. I told you, this is my favorite ministry story. So we're going to take a long time. Might get done by Christmas. Can't wait. Talk to you soon. Nightly Nonsense.